Richard Rue, right? And Carlos Humberto Canchay and Lisette as well.
Lisette, Carlos is about to join.
Okay, and Jason Mauricio. Not yet.
I'm trying to switch on my webcam, but I can't. I don't know why. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Yes, we get to see that you have your camera on.
You can see me?
We can't.
Now, yes.
Okay, now we see you.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
Okay. Nice to meet you as well. Well, we will get started in 2 minutes. Okay.
Can I already share my?
So hold on a second.
Yeah.
So you know, I'm going to be in charge of this room. So each presenter will have 20 minutes to talk and 10 minutes for Q&A. I'll let you know when you have 2 minutes left. Okay. And of course, for the audience, you can activate the camera if you feel like when the time for questions come, or else you can use the chat. So we will get started then with Richard Rue, developing intercultural intelligence competence in the foreign language class education. Richard is attending our Universidad Las Palmas de Gran Canaria in Spain. So, Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to share my presentation. Can you see it?
Yeah, we're seeing the presentation.
Great. So, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you to the organizers for accepting me to take part in this wonderful conference. My presentation, Developing Intercultural Intelligence Communication, aims to give insights into the stages in the acquisition of the intercultural competence in higher education, and particularly in faculties of translation and interpreting, is the context in which I've been working for more than 20 years as a professor of English and French as foreign languages. So the literature on intercultural competence provides, as we all know, a variety of terms whose definitions very often overlap each other. Interculturality, awareness, training, learning, education, literacy, understanding, and intercultural intelligence. And there is a further overlap, a very frequent one, between the expressions cultural intelligence and as you can see on this slide, it is going to be a step-by-step approach, because I would like to start by introducing some of the major theories on intelligence, to then focus on 5 general approaches to cultural intelligence by authors from different fields, but none from the field of higher education and less from the field of translation and interpreting. And no, or at least extremely little research on the concept of intercultural so far. And this is why the third step will focus on 4 educational approaches that will be put in parallel with the previous models in order to try and identify the specific value of intercultural intelligence for translators and interpreters. The objective today is particularly and weaknesses of different models of cultural intelligence and of intercultural communicative competence as models related, directly related to translation and interpreting in order to establish, I hope so, a model or framework for translation and interpreting students and educators. This model is aimed at guiding trainee translators and educators to develop their intercultural intelligence over the 4 years of the degree courses we have here in Spain. Translation and interpreting is studied over 4 years in the degree and 1 year. However, I do believe that most of what I will say today can apply to other areas of higher education in which students are taught to engage in cultural behaviors using skills and qualities that are tuned to their future work environment. So just to set the framework basically and the background, bachelor's degrees in translation and interpreting generally cover a wide range of subjects from the traditional language classes, focused on language, obviously, and intercultural competence, to the more professionally oriented subjects that include specialized translation, conference interpreting, community interpreting, or even translation technology. The work of translators and interpreters requires certain ways to make intercultural communication possible in many different contexts among individuals from different contexts. In addition to fluency, of course, in both the source and the target language, translators knowledge, cultural sensitivity, and intercultural intelligence. So a reflection on intercultural intelligence should start by a definition of what we understand by intelligence. And in order to do so, I'd like to start with some of the major theories on intelligence. Of course, we need to start with Howard Gardner, one of the first theoreticians to present the and to analyze its potential impact on education. Actually, Gardner, I would say, pluralizes the traditional concept of intelligence from logical and linguistic problem solving to a set of abilities, of talents, of mental skills he calls intelligences. His definition of an intelligence being, and you've got here other solve problems, fashion of consequence, particular cultural setting. So Gardner proposed to approach intelligence from a pluralistic and diverse perspective, and he identified 8 intelligence: logical, mathematic, linguistic, spatial, musical, bodily, kinesthetic, intrapersonal, and naturalistic. Another important Sternberg, Robert Sternberg, who emphasizes types of ability to create intelligent behavior. Analytical intelligence, which actually relates to the individual's internal world, to his ability or her ability to evaluation, to compare, to analyze, but also creative intelligence, which both the internal and external world involves, for example, the adaptation to novelty and the ability to come up with new ideas, and practical intelligence or contextual intelligence, which relates intelligence to the external world. In Sternberg's approach, intelligence is conceived in terms of context, which is very interesting for our field of study, because translators and interpreters always need to take the social cultural context into account when carrying out their work. So those theories have been acclaimed, criticized. One may agree with one or with the other, partially or completely. They've got differences, but they've got plenty of similarities. But what is sure is that both have changed the study of intelligence and have influenced later studies. However, I would say that it is quite interesting to see that neither of them takes into consideration what happens or should happen when individuals from different cultural groups interact. And this is not a simple question because, as Sternberg pointed out, different cultures may mean different intelligences. And this is precisely when some scholars actually started working on the concept of cultural intelligence. Like Christopher Early and Soon Ang, in their book, Cultural Intelligence, Individual Interactions Across Culture, that's the name of the book. Actually, Early and Ang used Sternberg's theory to propose a definition of cultural intelligence that bridges the gap between two fields, cultural studies and psychology. And their definition of cultural intelligence involves not only the capability of a person to adapt, to successfully adapt to novel and diverse cultural settings, but also the need to be effective. And to point out that Early and Ang work in the field of business management, but what they say about effectiveness is totally applicable to translation and interpreting, for example, but also to most of the career fields higher education prepares students for. Professional. The four facets of cultural intelligence is the one developed a bit later, a few years later, by Soon Ang, Lin Van Dien, and other scholars, a model that highlights the fact that cultural intelligence is multidimensional and it comprises the behavioral factor, as you can see on this slide. And all this work actually resulted in a very important publication in that field, which is their Handbook of Cultural Intelligence, Theory, Measurement, and Application, and that was published in 2008. David Thomas and Kerr Ingsund are other scholars who actually researched into that field. And for them, cultural intelligence is the capability to interact effectively across cultures. And once again, the focus is put on effectiveness. You can see that for these authors, cultural intelligence is made of three parts: knowledge of what culture is, of how culture affects behavior, practice of mindfulness, that's the ability to pay attention reflectively and creatively, and finally, cross-cultural skills to become competent across a range of situations. David Livermore, in 2009, also considers cultural intelligence as the ability to effectively reach across the chasm of cultural difference in ways that are loving and respectful. And according to Livermore, cultural intelligence consists of four different factors: knowledge intelligence, interpretive intelligence, perseverance, and behavioral intelligence. So behavior. So all of them overlap in a variety of ways, but he points out that although cultural intelligence includes having information about different cultures and what they value, it begins with understanding ourselves. End of quote. So now the question is cultural intelligence the most adequate concept to refer to communication across cultures? Well, more than a problem of concept, we may say that it is a question of terminology. When Early, Thomas, Inkson, or Livermore refer to cultural intelligence, they're related to effectiveness and to task performance in culturally diverse settings. So shouldn't we prefer the word intercultural intelligence over cultural intelligence? And well, it is true, I think, that it sounds as if cultural intelligence was based from the belief in multiculturalism, while intercultural intelligence was based from the belief in interculturalism. And this is why I tend to prefer the term intercultural intelligence, first used by Brooks Peterson in 2004, to refer to the qualities observed in international executives that enable them to succeed globally. And you've got here the definition of, Pearson's definition of intercultural intelligence. And actually, it's to prepare people from the real world, really. And supposedly, that's what we need to do in our higher education institutions. We need to prepare our students for their future work environment. In another very similar book written 10 years later by Michel Sauquet and Martin Viellajus, called L'intelligence interculturelle, we've got a very interesting definition, which I'm not going to read in French, but basically what they say is that they consider intercultural intelligence as a process of vigilance and curiosity, an attempt to understand the logic of those of our working partners whose culture, ways of thinking, and ways of functioning are different from ours. And they actually identify 3 stages in the development of intercultural intelligence. First of all, observing the context, then exploring the differences, and finally, analyzing the differences. So basically, so far, we've seen how the concept of intercultural intelligence, and that would be like a summary of what I've said till now, the concept of intercultural intelligence has long been used in the business world to bridge the cultural divide, to avoid misunderstandings that affect business. All the approaches we've seen consider intercultural intelligence as a kind of new intelligence, not only cognitive, but pluralistic and related to internal and external factors. It is clearly an ability to be developed throughout different factors, stages, depending on the authors. Knowledge, motivation, and behavior are factors to be developed to within the individual who works across cultures. And it is pointed out that developing cultural intelligence means not only displaying certain skills towards the others, but also understanding our knowledge, feelings, and culture, our own culture. And finally, the word effectiveness is a shared common need. And of course, it is a shared common need for future translators and interpreters. Right, let's come to the world of translation and interpreting in higher education. Well, in translation and interpreting, cultural intelligence may not be the most adequate concept, and we may prefer to use the expression intercultural intelligence over cultural intelligence, as it seems, I would say, more accurate when dealing with translation and interpreting activities that involve mediation between more than one culture. And that's what we strive to do in our faculties, in our language classes, in our translation and interpreting classes. We actually want to try and prepare students in the best possible way for the intercultural situations they might have to deal with in the future. They are gradually led to understand that language without intercultural intelligence can lead to false cultural understanding and can actually become a disadvantage in communication. And actually, as teachers, we feel that it is our responsibility to develop their initial intercultural sensitivity into intercultural intelligence that involves, well, the ability to negotiate and collaborate when facing conflicts. We feel it is our responsibility to turn them into interculturally intelligent mediators, no? By building on Cram's idea of a third and negotiated cultural space to be created in international intercultural relations. Or, as Peterson says, to give them the ability to engage in a set of cultural behaviors. So basically, translation and interpreting, as we may know, are processes of communication across cultures, in which even the translators and interpreters' culture may be different from that of the other parties. And this is why training future professionals, professionals in the field of translation may be described in 3 gradual steps. First, the necessity to enhance intercultural awareness and understanding, and that includes language awareness, acceptance of otherness, awareness of one's own culture, right? Secondly, the development of intercultural communicative competence, building on Byron's model, we all know. And finally, reaching intercultural intelligence. And there we've got the process model of intercultural intelligence that includes attitudes, knowledge, comprehension, and desired internal outcome. And this includes, obviously, effectiveness, right? So we find the result of crossing both models, the intercultural intelligence model and the intercultural communicative competence model, quite interesting to move towards a set of recommendations on how to deal with intercultural intelligence in higher education. We cannot forget that Byram's model is of a prescriptive nature, with implicit recommendations for educators and curriculum designers. Early and Ang's model, on the other hand, is rather oriented to the world of work, which is precisely what we are also training our students for. Hence the necessity, I would say, to further cross these models with a third model, and this time in the field of translation and interpreting. We've got very few models in the field of translation and interpreting. I would like to mention Pushhacker's model here, who tries to summarize these abilities, translators and interpreters' abilities as follows: linguistic transfer competence, cultural competence, interaction management skills, professional role performance skills, and ethical behavior. But there's another model which I find even more interesting, which is the PACTI model. PACTI is a research group, and research group has been working for more than 15 years now. And basically, the PACTI model presents transfer competence as the core competence, which includes communicative competence into 2 languages, extra-linguistic competence, psychophysiological competence, and professional instrumental competence. And you've got all the details here of the subcategories and the subcompetencies, which I'm not going to read because otherwise I'm going to be short of time. So now, after all this, well, I think it becomes necessary to draw a parallel between the 3 models together: the intercultural intelligence model, the intercultural communicative competence model, and the translation and interpreting model. And then we can arrive at interesting conclusions. The 3 models are certainly differing due to the context they're based on: business management on the one hand, education on the other hand, and a particular field like translation and interpreting. And that could be any other field related to the degree or the profession we're preparing our students for. But they're also overlapping, these models, and they present challenges to trainee translators and interpreters regarding the development of their intercultural intelligence. And if we cross the 3 models, well, it shows us that being in tune with the cultural precepts that underpin the students' behavior and norms, as well as being in tune with the competencies supposed to be attained to become efficient professionals, well, all this is vital to the development of intercultural competence and intelligence in a higher education context. So these overlapping models also help us understand the necessity to create a third cultural space referred by Cramsch, leading to collaboration so that all objectives, be they academic, professional, or otherwise, are met. And these models can be divided into 2 types, and that's going to be almost my conclusion now. We've got core orientational models and developmental models. The former is best presented through the intercultural communicative competence model by Byram, and it deals with shared meanings and communicative mutuality between interlocutors in educational context. The other 2 models would be rather developmental, as they focus on the stages of maturity and progression in intercultural intelligence, linking them directly to the world of work. Well, in conclusion, what I have attempted to demonstrate in this presentation is the need for a gradual development of intercultural intelligence in higher education contexts in 3 stages. First, by exposing students to interculturality. In the case of our translation and interpreting faculties, this is usually done in the foreign language classroom right from the first year of their studies. Second, by helping them to work and interact in intercultural contexts in order to acquire higher levels of intercultural communicative competence. And this is what we do by working in groups on different tasks, both in the language classroom and in the translation or interpreting classroom, but also when supervising students on the on-field placements in the 3rd and 4th year of their degree. And this will help them acquire, well, I would say, a skill sets of intercultural competence at varying degrees. And finally, and that would be the last step, by giving them further opportunities to collaborate interculturally, to create a 3rd cultural space, and to attain the skill and possess the worldview involving intercultural intelligence. And this is usually done through their last 1 semester placement in the 4th year, in which students get a grip on how to interact and negotiate in real life encounters, intercultural encounters, working on skills related to the translator and interpreter's profession. And this work placement is then followed by intensive feedback in the classroom. So basically, this way of conceptualizing these 3 steps may lead to, I think, a better understanding of how to identify and assess the progress of acquiring intercultural intelligence in translation, interpreting studies in particular, but also more generally speaking in higher education. These are the references I have used, and thank you very much for your attention. I think I've more or less, stuck to the time, a bit more than 20 minutes, sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much for this enlightening theoretical presentation on different perspectives. And I open here a space for everybody to share insights or questions. So is there any person interested in sharing ideas? Let's see via chat. Okay, well, I do have a question regarding your presentation, and I was also very interested in this issue by reading your abstract, and is sometimes it seems items such as stereotypes and prejudice are taking over in contemporary societies. So like, how can we help future interpreters and translators overcome such stereotypes and categorization that we can probably encounter when it comes to having intercultural communication?
Not easy, but I would say that what we tried. Well, first of all, I've got I'm quite lucky to work in a very intercultural setting, because here in the Canary Islands we've got students from very different backgrounds in a classroom of 20 students, 25 students. We might have students from different countries in Latin America, for example. We've got quite a few African students, and we've got European students, not only from the Canary Islands, but from other areas of Europe through the Erasmus Plus program. So we work on experience, basically, and a work group helps a lot. Working on experience, working as well on field. We've got plenty of on-field practice, on-field placement, and that's we're quite lucky to have that in the 3rd and 4th year, in really in a variety of contexts, will help deal with those issues and having feedback, with the students on those issues.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much once again. Some people via chat are asking you to share the reference list one more time. So you could probably share it again, and probably they would like to have a picture of it.
Yes, I'm a bit lost with I can see only the photos. I can't see my, hold on. don't know what I've done here. If I I know, just a minute. Estás compartiendo pantalla. Yes,
Yeah.
just a minute. I am just about to do it. Here is my presentation. Sorry. So can you see it now?
Yeah, here it is for those of you who asked for it. Carlos Humberto and John Jimenez as well.
Well, it will be a pleasure to share my presentation as well, the slides. I know some of you want to.
Sure.
Have them.
Okay. Thank you very much. And now I would like to call upon Carlos Chancay and Lisette Rojas. They are going to introduce us to a parallel study about the intercultural profile of Ecuadorian and Colombian university professors. You guys have the floor.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
We're so glad to be here and to have this opportunity to share this reflection with you. The title of my name is Lisette Rojas. I am a professor at Universidad Colombiana, and my partner is Carlos Humberto Chancay. He is a full-time professor at Universidad Técnica de Manabí, Ecuador. The title of parallel study about the intercultural profile of Ecuadorian and Colombian university professors of English. So basically what we're going to do is to share with you some of the main findings of doctoral studies. They are two separate studies with different population in different contexts at different times. But it comes that we met with Professor Carlos. We met in an event at Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, and we were sharing our thesis. And when we heard each other, we realized that we had very similar projects or studies, and with very similar findings. So it caught our attention, and we decided to do this parallel about the findings of our and what we did in our doctoral study. So that's it.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Hello, everybody. As Alice said, we are going to share some information about two parallel studies between Ecuador and Colombia. Our presentation is divided in 6 points: the problem objectives, the contents, the methodology applied, results, conclusions, and some information about the authors.
Okay, so I'm going to share with you some of the aspects that gave rise to our projects. In my specific case, in Colombiana University, you know that we have the accreditation. That's something that is required by the Ministry of Education, and it's something very important for us. And part of that, a factor that is evaluated is the internationalization, understood as having the international and intercultural competence, among other aspects. So in the promotion of intercultural competences in the academic community is very important for the internationalization processes. However, by examining the different documents product of that accreditation process in the university, I realized that interculturality, or the development of intercultural competence as a prerequisite for interactions with other cultures, was not included in those institutional documents, not even in the documents of the degree in English or licenciatura program in which I work. our educational project at that time lacked both a clear component of internationalization as well as the promotion of intercultural competence in the pedagogical processes of the program. On that account, I decided to explore the intercultural dimension of teaching English as a foreign language, and not only in the university where I also in some other universities. So I work with a public university based on the study of the teacher cognition. So starting from the teachers, for me, it's like the first step for fostering that competence. We need to start with the teachers. Okay.
Yes,
So,
about the Ecuadorian context, well, most of the time the intercultural studies in our country focus on anthropological aspects. There are a few studies about how to interact with the classroom, how to interact with other cultures. I mean, to know each other, to share information, to know the differences between different cultural content, not just in our local cultures, but also with culture from other countries. The teaching emphasis on the linguistic competence, the main core of the language classroom is just this, to explore the linguistic competence, to get students speak the language, but not so much focus on how to develop the interaction between people from other cultures. And the lack of teaching training about how to merge two important aspects in the language classroom, language and the culture.
Okay, so all of those considerations took us to pose the following questions. We're not going to read all of them because of the time, but in general, in my case, what I wanted to do was to analyze the teachers' beliefs, conceptions, and reported practices of Colombian public university lecturers in relation to IC and its development in the EFL classroom. So to see what those beliefs, those conceptions and reported practices told us about our intercultural profile, the way they foster their English as foreign language classroom, and to identify the different factors that affect or contribute to the development of the intercultural competence in their classrooms. Finally, to establish the extent to which those professors were willing and ready to adopt an intercultural perspective in their teaching practices.
In the Ecuadorian context, the study was focused on to know the diagnosis about how the intercultural competence of university teachers are in each the levels. Also to analyze the teaching practices, the pedagogical teaching practices that teachers could apply into the classrooms, and also to determine what kind of content, what kind of objective they try to develop in the classroom with their students. As you can see, this study was applied between Colombia and Ecuador in different times, but with similar objectives and similar points of view. It's really important to share with you that both countries share different aspects because of the traditional history that we have as a background.
Okay, for the methodology, we followed the mixed method research, and I based my study on the explanatory sequential research design proposed by Creswell, 2015. And for the case of Carlos, he followed the convergent research design. You know that the mixed method involves both phases, a qualitative and a quantitative phase. The Ecuadorian study, Carlos used a semi-structured interview, survey, and content analysis as research instruments with 68 participants. In my case, I had 70 participants, and I had as instruments a survey or questionnaire and a semi-structured interview. We use the software Atlas E to analyze the qualitative data, and SPSS to analyze the quantitative data. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you, or we are going to tell you about some of the results, specifically those results that are common, that are very similar. We cannot talk about all of them, but it's the ones that caught our attention because of the similarities between in both contexts. So first of all, those professors had an apparent understanding of the context. They seem to understand the concept, sorry, of intercultural competence and how to take it to the classroom. But when analyzing and when going deeper on that, we could realize that it was not like that. And for the case of the Ecuadorian context, when Professor Carlos analyzed their plannings, he could realize that it wasn't really there the fostering of the intercultural competence. In my case, when I interviewed them, and when they reported practices, I could realize that they basically understood the intercultural competence in terms of the transmission of knowledge rather than on the development of some skills.
Yes. Also, when we were talking about at that time between how to merge language and culture into the classroom, we could realize that most of the teachers find kind of difficult to do it. That's because they prefer to focus on the linguistic skills. This is the priority of the language classroom in every class. And maybe chance that, well, teachers prefer to master those linguistic skills rather than to interact with the students to develop not just the IC, but also some other complements like values like respect, avoid stereotypes between different misunderstandings that could happen between different cultures.
Okay, another important finding that is common for both contexts is the fact that those professors prefer those contents related to the small C contents, yeah, culture, sorry, small C culture. So such as arts, food, daily routines, living conditions, music, history, etc. So we assume that it might be because of the fact that these are like the most approached topics on the different course books, or because as banks and firms, that is something that that happens with many language teachers, that they limit themselves to the superficial level of cultural teaching, something that specialists in interculturality refer. That's something very similar for both groups of professors.
We also find that the intercultural activities most of the times are incidental. Each try to talk about these topics into the classroom when there is a chance the text would come. And not to also develop vocabulary, for example, speaking activities or listening activities to enhance students with the intercultural competence. Most of the time, teachers prefer, they refer to intercultural topics just in this way, but not because they prefer to plan a lesson with all the activities in order to develop the IC.
Okay, another thing that was important, and it's important to mention, it's the lack of agreement that was found between what what they report and what they actually do, what they think and what they actually do. For the case of the Ecuadorian context, most of the 90% of the teachers affirm they include intercultural activities to develop the intercultural competence, but in the plannings, it doesn't appear. In my case, in the questionnaire, they say that the intercultural competence is included, but in the interview, the 80% of them admitted not to do so. So they admitted that they really don't do it or didn't do it at that time, and it was not that important. And it was more, as Carlos said, it was more incidental, just if the topic of the course book allowed to something like that. But it was something that was not really planned. And finally, one of the findings that for me is one of the most important in my case is that many of the professors demonstrate a great need to promote cultural relativism and the reinforcement of their own identity to avoid attitudes of inverted ethnocentrism. You know that we talk about ethnocentrism, that is the rejection toward the otherness, toward the foreign culture, the difference. But there is also what I have called inverted ethnocentrism, and is the rejection toward your own culture, towards your own countries, and considering those hegemonic and dominant cultures are as the superior and ideal ones. So that's something that worries the teachers, and they are like fighting against that, and they want their students to, especially those students that are studying for being teachers, English teachers, because they love English, they love their culture, the English-speaking countries, and they perceive them as superior, as available to imitate, and yeah, better cultures.
And also we could find that some factors that develop the development of the cultural competence into the classroom. For example, in both contexts, most of the time, the amount of hours that teachers have per week for teaching is between 16 and 18, and in some cases, 20 hours per week of classes, which limit the time they have for preparing the lesson plans or for researching information about how to develop the intercultural competence. Also, the amount of students in each classroom, it could be between 38, that is, could be the minimum, and also could have a high level of students, almost 50 or 60 per classroom. Another factor could be the development research study, few hours that teacher has per week to focus on different projects they could have for development researchers about intercultural competence. Another good important aspect was the jobs positions. The better job position, the better the intercultural profile of the teacher. It means that most of the teachers who had a better salary, better job positions, they have more chance for doing researches, they have more time for go to congresses, they have more time to study abroad, things like that. Some chances that give them a better view about how to develop that into the classroom. Needs of highlighting students' own culture from others too. As Alice said, the priority of knowing about our culture, the local culture, to know the local culture, to know how to talk about our local culture, express our local culture to others, and also respect the others' point of view from different cultures. The research lines about the cultural competence and our content is kind of limited. Most of the time, those are based on the linguistic competence, how to develop them into the classroom. And also the lack of resources adapted to each cultural context for enhancing that. I see teachers don't know what kind of pedagogical strategies they can apply to develop material and for enhancing the intercultural competence into the students.
Okay, and finally, the conclusion. So as we have said, professors were aware the need of more training, not only by themselves looking for it, but also they need the support. They emphasize on the support of the institutions to offer them that training and to get to know how to take it to the classrooms. We need more research about that, the inclusion of more research lines about how to merge language and culture in the classroom. Reviews of the topic that teachers could include in their planning. So more like information about that, a review of the cultural iceberg example. The development of the resources for enhancing the intercultural competence, so more authentic resources and more. If it is not included in the course book, we can do it ourselves. And also, as Carlos said, since we could find that the better the job position in academic level, the better like their intercultural profile. It's important for institutions to hire more full-time teachers, to give them more guarantees for them to like have the time to study more about the topic, to like get some more training about the area, which is another important aspect. And to start from reservist teachers. We need to start from that. That's why we have already started with we have already finished another project with this time with reservist teachers. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Well,
so this is the bibliography.
Okay, thank you very much for showing us this comparative study on the intercultural profile of teachers in both countries. I kindly invite the audience to share your opinions or questions. You can do it via chat or use the microphone. Okay, we have to raise hands. We have Claudia Cárdenas and Oscar, so we will get started with Claudia, please.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your presentation. Actually, I have read both articles because I'm conducting a PhD. I'm studying my PhD, so I contacted Professor Rojas like a year ago because I was interested in getting to know more about the research. My question is the type of intercultural competence, or how close is it to what we are trying to yes, if it is connected to the profile of the intercultural teacher that we need in our context. Because probably I know that you adapted an instrument from CERCU, but is it really, or does it really meet the needs of our context? How was it adapted to our context? That's my question.
The questionnaire specifically you're talking?
Yes, questionnaire. Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, I took into consideration all of the questions. It was, as you said, in my case, my question was from the one of circles, and so, but I took into account all of the aspects that apply to our context and our professors. And also during the interview, I emphasized in some of the aspects that were maybe like not considered in the questionnaire, or that needed more information, and that's why I got that last finding. I reviewed the one about the need for the reinforcements of their own identity and to fight those ethnocentric attitudes, but those of inverted ethnocentrism. And yes, but it was more because of the answers of the interview. I would say.
Exactly. I was thinking of applying an instrument like that, but then I questioned myself, and then after all the readings I have been doing, I realized that probably what I don't want to do is to measure the levels of intercultural competence of teachers, because my purpose is not to judge them or to tell them, well, you are at this point or at this level, but I think that it'll be better if we can, to build, like, to understand, like, where they're from, where you were showing the different contexts you could observe from the population. So I think that we need to think about that, right? To think about our context. So I think, and I really like the articles that you have shared. I read them both, and I have used them for my lead review. I found them very interesting in terms of the findings and the all the things that you did in order to gather the information.
And I was going to share with you my thesis, but I forgot it. So now that you talk to me, I will do it.
Thank you very much. All right.
Presentation.
Thank you very much. There's another question, I think. We still have some minutes left. Question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much to the presenters. It was a very interesting talk. I have a question. At the end of your presentation, or towards the end of your presentation, you referred to, would you call the profile of the teachers in relationship with the interculturality levels, or the level of interculturality. And at the end, you say that the invitation is for institutions to hire teachers more ably to ensure that they develop higher levels of interculturality. I am wondering, though, if the relationship between interculturality and the high profile of the teacher is a relationship of causality or correlation. What I mean is, would it really, would hiring a teacher more stably lead to higher profiles of interculturality? Or is it that better, or teachers who are better trained in intercultural regards end up at better jobs?
Oh, okay. So it was also something that caught our attention. In my case, I said, well, it might not have any relationship, because it was one of the correlations I did, but it was very interesting and very curious that the best answers in terms of their conceptualizations and the reported practices were the ones that were given by full-time professors. So it might not be the case because of their job position specifically, but because of the time they have to be receive more training. And I was asking the professors about it, and I told them in the questionnaire it happened, and the best answers were the ones. Do you think there is any correlation, any relationship between both, any connection? And they say it might be because of the time, because and maybe motivation sometimes, because of the way they like the job position, their contracts, and because those paid by hours, like hourly paid professors, they work in different places. They just stay university, and they moved, they go to another place, etc., etc. So it might be because of that, because of the time they have to work with other colleagues, work on research, to study more about the area and stuff. So so we think that when I say we, is my teacher and me, Isabel Alonso, who has about this as well, think that it has to do something, the job positions, and maybe the motivation, as I said, or the time. I don't know if Carlos wants to say something.
Unfortunately, jobs positions are established in the high levels of the institute. Organize all the high levels of universities. for the position have to do in the contract. It's kind of difficult to change it, but we can work with teachers with the training to work to know how to develop an intercultural profile and how to could be the solution.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, it seems no. Thank you very much. It's such an interesting topic. I probably wanted to know if is like what's the explanation for the mismatch between the theoretical concepts and the practice. Very briefly, Professor.
Between the concepts, this conceptualization they gave us and the practice.
The practices.
Yeah, because when at the beginning we both did the same. They gave us their conceptualizations of what intercultural competence was. Similar to the ones that are given by scholars, etc., etc. But when they were reporting their practices and when Professor Carlos was reading their plannings, he could realize that it wasn't there really. And in my case, but through the interviews, they were in their practice because I couldn't do observations. So they were reporting what they did. I could realize that they basically the transmission of knowledge. Maybe they do something of comparisons between both cultures, but no more. Yeah. So nothing related to attitudes, to the skills and critical cultural awareness, which is very important. So it was really perceived. Carlos,
Yes,
so probably, I'm sorry, we're running a little bit of time, but definitely this is important for further research as to how to probably bridge this gap between the theoretical concepts and the practice. Thank you a lot. And now I would like to introduce you to Jason Mauricio Cárdenas Reyes from Universidad Grenoble Alpes. Who's going to be talking about post-conflict teaching training program on foreign language teaching in Colombia, a peace-based approach. Thank you very much, Jason. You have the floor.
Good morning, dear audience in Colombia. Good morning here in France. It's like almost evening. Thank you very much for this opportunity, for sharing, for letting me share my research. I'm gonna share the screen, and there it is. Okay, so okay, here we go. So my name is Jason Mauricio Cárdenas Reyes. I'm a PhD candidate at the Universidad Grenoble Alpes in France, and research project entitled Post-Conflict Teaching Training Program on Foreign Language Teaching in Colombia, a peace-based approach. This is the information that I'm going to question, a theoretical framework, the research method, the data collection, the results, and finally the conclusion. So the introduction first for the people who are from Colombia. I'm gonna highlight briefly like the general situation of how rural teachers are in our country. So first of all, according to the information that I found from Bautista and Gonzalez, rural teachers are characterized by being by coming from very poor families. They belong to a very low social class, different from teachers from urban schools. some of them argue that they have, thanks to education, they have been rescued from violence and their wrongdoing, such as narco traffic. Their working conditions of rural teachers aren't quite good. Salaries are low. The school infrastructures are in bad condition. The access to roads, it's critical. And among some other situations that are really common in developing. And which interests us the most, teachings are minimal or hard to get. Based on this, be created for young teachers to be to teach between former aggressors and victims of the armed conflict. To try to answer this question, I'll propose a theoretical framework composed of 7 different perceptions. The first one is innovation. The French state states that for teaching a foreign language or for learning a foreign language, it's very important to ask what for or the purpose of it. Jean-Claude Bacot, a French scholar in the fields of FLT, states that foreign language didactics has to respond to concerns, or to put in or try to offer solutions to social is the context. In a training program for teachers, for rural teachers, it's necessary to understand that. So based on this, Baker and company stated that social, political, cultural, and economic factors impact the attitude toward languages. If we don't consider the elements of the sociocultural background of students, we might not be able to achieve our goal. To illustrate my point, the sample that I found on a workbook, a textbook, created by the Colombian Ministry of Education and the British Council. In this case, we can see how the explanations for simple present are carried out with examples as if students were Americans. They're thinking about Florida, they're thinking about New York, they're even rock and metal music and sports such as yoga, which is completely out of context because these things don't matter to rural schoolers. Now, if we're going to teach a foreign language in a rural school, teachers need to know first the students, then the physical setting, the natural teaching resources, and the time. All of these of course, context is necessary, but the needs as well. He states that social links of the natural learning setting and the progress of automatic satisfaction, which is we need to think of the needs of our target students, in this case, rural schoolers. If we understand this, we're pretty, we can come up with a design of materials. In order to teach the language, and all establish that most research for activity and stress, its motivating effect on learning. Talk about what people know in the Colombian countryside, their music, their food, even their leisure activities, they might pay attention. But if we're still talking about the Eiffel Tower, that's the Statue of Liberty, and things like that, just get bored. Now, television defines an authentic text as one which is produced in order to communicate rather than to teach. Of course, we're talking about a language. We need to communicate. We need to make students to communicate, which is why creating authentic material is the key for calling students' attention. The fifth element, which is quite innovative in this approach, is peace education. Given the new geopolitical context in Colombia, peace education comes up as the possible key for integrating communities, either the victims and the aggressors. The teacher needs to know this. The teacher needs to understand that the situation in Colombia is different, and we need to talk. I mean, the actions must be reflected on the teachings. This education will help us to work on peace, reconciliation, to propose projects for protect the environment, to create conscience on people, on society and communities on how we should also respect and some more elements that the peace education principles have. Now, the peace agreements highlighted two important elements for taking into consideration when thinking about education in rural schools. For flexible educational programs for preschool, middle, and high school to be adapted to rural communities. Of course, with a different approach. We cannot talk about rural education the same way we do about urban education or education in cities. And the second element, which is quite forming technical education for 10th and 11th graders. And so we can see that education here is not only about teaching, for example, of foreign language, but this would evoke and promote a development approach in order not to teach a foreign language, but also to offer a different lifestyle, which is completely isolated from the world. Teachers also need to understand that the rural school, all decisions, all the meetings, all the problems are discussed in rural schools, which is why the rural school constitutes itself as this for Colombian countryside communities. Now, definitely, teacher development also has to be. So my research seeks to explain two different approaches. The first one is short teacher empowerment, which offers 6 different elements to make teachers more autonomous, to make things by themselves, and to impact possibly their students. The second aspect is, the second theory is Fuller's teacher development, who emphasizes 3 different stages on teachers' concerns. The first one is the pre-teaching, which is how the teachers perceive the teaching and the socio-cultural environment. The second is how beginning teachers feel about the way they perform before students. And finally is how experienced teachers concerned not about that anymore, but their main worries are on the way they can positively impact their students. The research method that I used was ethnography in education. I'm a foreign language teacher, and of course I needed to avoid the bias And as a researcher, the research ethic needed to come up. So my responsibility was to propose a solid theoretical framework that could help me to establish the hypothesis and to start collecting the data based on the information, based on the observation, based on observations, and based on realities, in order to avoid my personal opinions as a teacher. There were two groups of participants in this study. The first one, undergraduate students from language and philology teaching programs in Bogotá, from public and private universities. Their age oscillated from 21 to 30 years old. 7 women and 8 men participated. In general, this group of participants don't have more than 2 years of teaching experience. On the other hand, the second group of participants are rural teachers. They work in rural public schools. Their age range oscillate from 45 to 60 years old. 6 women and 5 men participated. They have more than 30 years of teaching experience. And this and the data was collected in different departments, such as Cundinamarca, Meta, and Santander in Colombia. The data collection methods that I used was surveys with multiple questions and interviews with open questions. The quantitative methods were used to analyze the answers of the first group of participants. Qualitative methods were used to analyze the answers of the second group of participants. And so the data analysis methods were content analysis and cognitive analysis. Now, as the study is still going on, I created a partial model in order to try to understand some of the data that I've analyzed so far. So with the answers that I've obtained from the participants and the observations that I carried out, I could start thinking of what kind of teaching training program young teachers would need. And for doing so, it is necessary also to think of a specific foreign language program to be implemented in rural schools. So based on the topics, the peace values that come from that are part of the peace education, the language activities, and the peace-based methodology, also part of peace education, and with the principles of teacher development, teachers might be able to know how to deal and how to conceive these foreign languages programs in order to be implemented in rural schools among different actors, specific actors that were part of the Colombian conflict. Most of the common answers that I found during the analysis were both groups considered teaching training as mandatory and as a complement of their teaching life. However, there are differences. The first group of the group 1 answers are more concerned on how they perform, how they deal with classroom management and the different things that might derive from these issues. The second group of answers that I analyzed focus more on how the importance of contextualizing educative policies to regions, which is, they've told me that unfortunately, Secretarios of Education don't apply the same evaluative instruments to measure the knowledge of rural students as if they were urban students. So there are 3 conclusions that I can propose so far. As I said, my study is still going on. And so the first one is that teaching training is necessary in order to update teaching skills and strategies in order to work no matter where. The second is that according to what the second group of participants, which are rural teachers, secretaries of education should be more interested on creating teaching training programs, affordable and of course reachable to teachers. And also another conclusion is young teachers should have at least a slight sort of training welcome when they come to rural schools, because most of the teachers and most of the things that are heard in these in these communities are teachers arrive at these communities and have no idea on how to deal or how to understand rural communities and societies. Finally, universities should be part of this process, especially in Colombia, as we're talking about post-conflict education. We need to propose different tools and strategies for young teachers so they could be able to teach and work in different scenarios as the ones that I've just mentioned. Thank you very much for attending to my conference, and I'll be thrilled to answer to your questions if you have some. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much for such an insightful and thought-provoking presentation. We have some hands raised. Emilia, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jason. I thought it was really interesting and really relevant. What I wanted to know is if you could comment a little bit more about the role of peace education in this. And also I'm curious about whether you've perceived any conflict of teachers feeling that these elements of peace education are not necessary, if there's any resistance towards it, or if there's any perceived differences between what the rural communities want as far as peace education and what the teachers would like to include.
Okay, thank you very much for your question, which I would like to answer right away. Peace education, actually, the perception I had about peace education was the one that that looked for making people come together in fraternity and to have a real and happy life after the conflict, but it's not. Peace education offers different principles in order, for example, to contribute to the protection to the environment, to work on, for example, the role of the women in the conflict, which was a really wide discussion that took place during the discussion in the peace agreements. So peace education have a variety, a wide frame of topics and principles and strategies to teach people how to face to conflicts by the bias of different methodologies. So my purpose of my research was to teach foreign language teachers and with this I think I could answer to your second question. So to teach these communities that are not reluctant to these new approaches. On the other hand, they're willing to learn. However, the conditions they face because of the lack of, infrastructure and means are quite difficult to be able to conduct these wonderful experiences to them.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you for your question.
Right, if you get to see there are some comments via chat, they say it's very interesting, and if you could possibly share the presentation, it's Professor Lisette is asking, and Claudia Cardenas as well, mentioning how important the concept of peace is crucial to our country. Is there any other person interested in asking any other question? Still have some minutes left. Probably you would like to take advantage. Ana Milena. No, Ana Milena is clapping.
I'm trying to look for the person.
Ana, we can barely hear you.
Can you hear me now? Better?
Yeah, it's a lot better.
Okay, I was looking for the best emoji to raise my hand, but I couldn't find it, sorry. And thank you for your presentation. And I was wondering if you could give us some more ideas on how, because you said that teachers need to be more trained about this idea of peace education, basically for rural and in comparison to urban areas. But I would like to know if you have some key aspects for teachers to be trained about. What kind of things could you go deeper into as a new teacher in this kind of education?
Okay. Okay. First, I think that thank you for your question. The key aspects is to know better the context. The context is key. If the teacher have no idea what kind of groups he's going to work with, that would be a waste of time, because he would be flying on theories and perceptions that aren't real. The second thing is the needs. If we understand what the students are really looking for, what the students really want to learn, as for example, I explained that the peace agreement proposed that we should work on, for example, agricultural matters. So if the teacher knows how to deal with how to develop teaching foreign language content and adapt it to that specific area or region, students will be more interested, because we might praise their culture, which is being ignored for the last decades. So this is like the key. And of course, some teaching, some classroom management techniques that would be also helpful for them, because they are young teachers and they might need to learn how to develop different strategies, and especially in these cases, which in a rural school you might find, for example, children from different, origins, paramilitary groups, guerrilla groups, displaced people, and all.
Thank you. There's one more question via chat. It says, thank you, Jason. I wonder if rural schools play a different role in language teaching and learning, as if they are different to teach foreign languages compared to others.
Yeah, it's quite an experience and a challenge because they have specific needs and specific interests. For example, the materials that I designed were specific to that specific areas, to those specific areas. So my purpose was not to talk about, for example, how delicious croissants are in France, or to talk about the tea in England, but for example, to make the language, to turn the language into a vector of knowledge, and to talk about, for example, the different issues that were taking place in that moment, in order to consider and to adapt, to contextualize the different elements of the language into their lives. And of course, they play a very important role because the idea of peace education is to promote social development. And in my personal opinion, personal development could be carried out if we offer this new skill to those rural communities, so they could, for example, create entrepreneurial, I don't know, projects to foster, I don't know, green, some kind of green tourism. So this could be helpful if we know how to implement it in those areas, which would be quite interesting for them, as they have, for these new generations, in order to avoid what the old ones didn't have.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to the different presenters, to Richard, Carlos, he said, and Jason. It's been a wonderful learning opportunity, and it makes us reflect upon our roles as teachers and how much we need to keep on improving, right? What I would like to invite you to open your cameras so that we can have a picture of the presenters and everybody else here. We can have like a record of things. So that's it. Thank you very much. All right.
Just one thing, I don't know how to share my presentation to you. Lisette asked me to, but I don't know what would be like the mean if people are interested.
Probably via email.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Probably you guys, if you feel like sharing your emails, here via.
Okay. Got it.
So thank you very much. A quick reminder that lunchtime is starting, well, in Colombia, 12:10 to 2 p.m. and then we will see each other again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you.
Bye.